What's going on, everybody? We are back. We got episode number 2 of the Club and Sub DFS show tonight. Luke at Sparring or SWR _ betting, myself, John Targaryen at MMA Fox, are joined by Jonah at J Schiffy DFS, or is it DFS or MMA, Jonah?
No, it's DFS at J Schiffy DFS.
At J Schiffy DFS. Yeah, we're going to kind of just follow the same format as last week, break down, kind of this card from a DFS angle. I think we're going head-to-head with Kelton this week, so hopefully we can keep the viewership up a bit. But, yeah, anyway, guys, if you like the show, drop a like, subscribe, please. Like I said, as usual, brought to you by Bet Online. You can get 50% bonus for up to your first $1,000 deposit there using the promo code CLUBSUB. But, yeah, guys, let's get into it. So kind of it's an interesting slate this week because it's like I was just talking to Luke about this, Jonah, before you joined us, but it seems to be very top heavy and very bottom heavy. Like I absolutely detest the mid range this week. But we'll start with the top. Jonah, you want to start here? Give us your favorite play, your least favorite play, and just kind of general thoughts on the 9K range.
Yeah, so 9K and above, I think it kind of goes without saying. It's a little obvious here that Rodolfo Vieira is like the highest upside guy on the slate for me. He's obviously the most expensive fighter on the slate, but he is obviously a massive money line favorite. Anyone at the top of the price range will be at -400, but I personally played the under in this fight. He is a high-level grappler. I think I got like -140 on the under. He's close to even money to win inside of round one, which we're obviously want, especially at the high range on DK, especially in like GPP settings, because we need those early finishes. So I think Vieira against Fluffy Hernandez here has a massive grappling upside offensively, really when he gets it there, because I don't really think it's a matter of if, it's more of a matter of when. So I think that Vieira is our most likely fighter to finish inside the first round and has the highest upside. In terms of least favorite fighter at the top, above 9K, like Bilal Muhammad, I think wins this fight a lot of the time here. I think his money line at like -470 is potentially short. Like I'm not going to bet him straight. But I think he wins this fight a lot, but historically he's not a super high DFS scorer. And it's kind of a similar thing here with Ricky Simone and Bobby Green, where they're historically not finishers, but they're in good spots where I think that they have a chance to finish. But against guys like Kamaru Usman, who we know has 5-round upside here and is going to put on a pace in terms of grappling and control time, and then Vieira, who has all the finishing upside in the world, I think those three are definitely a tier below Vieira and Usman for me at the top.
Luke, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I pretty much echo every sentiment Jonah has as well. I'm also on the under 1.5 for Vieira too. So yeah, I'm going to have a ton of exposure to Vieira, but we were also kind of talking about it too before the pod, John, that, I think the large majority, I think what we're going to see for lineups is going to have Vieira Usman in there. So it's kind of one of those scenarios where, how much do you want to differentiate yourself? But at the same time, you don't want to, necessarily go full blown contrarian for the sake of doing it, especially if it's going to kill you. So yeah, once again, I echo kind of Jonah's sentiment there with Bilal not being a historic finisher, but I don't know. I do have kind of a sneaky angle on it that we have seen Lima, despite being a black belt, he has been subbed before by Jesse Taylor. I think he has had his back taken by multiple other opponents as well, who I think are actually less grapplers than Bilal. I actually think Bilal's grappling in and of itself is pretty underrated. So I would not be shocked here to see a Bilal sub or even have him clip him with something, drop down to a double. He transitions to the back really well and have him jump on something there. So like I said, man, I just don't want to be, I guess, necessarily 100% with the whole crew of, going Vieira Usman. I'm going to have some Bilal as well. I think he could be, a sneaky, decent play up at the top. But yeah, in terms of guys I don't love, I would actually probably more so say Simone than Bobby, just because I think Bobby could also be live for a late finish when Miller slows down. So yeah, that's kind of my take on the top.
Yeah, I have similar thoughts to you guys. Not a ton to add. I mean, look, obviously I like Vieira. I mean, how can you not? Jonah, you touched on it. That ITP line is wild. Like, I think it's pretty reasonable to expect him to finish this fight inside of 2 rounds if he's going to win. For me, I mean, the best play on the slate is Usman. I talked about it on the podcast last night, but I have 6 units on him. Like, and I mean, just look at his, his last couple scores, 156, 130, 168, 195 under the new system. Will he go that high? I don't know, but I think something similar to what we saw in the Masvidal fight is very in play here. I mean, just, the control time upside, if he does take the path of least resistance, is so high. And obviously at 9K, you can build a million things around him. But, I'm sure everybody's going to be in on Usman here. We're probably looking at, I don't know, what do you guys think, like 60% ownership? So it's got to be in that neighborhood, right?
Maybe higher, because he's cheaper than Simone and Bilal, who I think you guys made good points about Bilal having sneaky finishing upside, and maybe even Bobby Green too. But he's cheaper than both those guys, who he clearly projects better than. Like if Usman was 9.4, 9.2, I think he might be a little bit lower owned. But at 9K, like I definitely expect Usman to be the highest owned fighter on the slate.
Yeah, and like that's the thing, right? Because like even Vieira, as much as I like him, I think his upside's pretty much capped in that like 105 to 110 range, just because I think once the fight gets down, he probably finishes it fairly quickly. Don't think we're going to see a ton of control time or a ton of ground strikes. Maybe he could sub Hernandez inside a minute, but I don't think it's something you can count on. And yeah, like I'm kind of with you guys on Bilal. Like it's like, I expect he's going to be like probably fourth here in terms of scoring in this range, but if you have a couple lineups with Bilal in there and he does end up, maybe subbing Lima in the first round, well, I mean, that's going to look pretty good if he can beat out, Vieira potentially. But yeah, I don't love it. I don't really love the range in general, but, I'm going to be uber tied to Usman and Vieira. So is what it is. So we'll move on. 8K range. I really, really hate the 8K range. Luke, I'll start with you here. Like, what are your thoughts here? Favorite plays, least favorite plays?
Yeah, it's tough for me because just from a general betting perspective, I don't really have any plays on the mid-range straight. And at the same time, I also don't have any dog bets either. So I think it also just kind of shows just the volatility of the range because there's just so many different fights. It's kind of one of like those slates where it's like, if this, then that type of thing. And so that's why, in my opinion, we'll get to obviously the 7K range. But I think one of my, I guess, a little bit more slight contrarian takes probably to some people. I'm probably going to be slightly overweight on Martin because I do think she's going to actually come out here, take the correct game plan, which some might disagree with. Our boy Andrew's actually in the chat. I know we talked about this in the DMs where he thinks that that's exactly what Martin should do because he thinks Fiana's going to sub her. I say no. I think Martin is probably going to get outstruck on the feet. So I think even if that, comes in where, she pulls a Hannah Cyphers round one scenario, I think she's going to learn pretty quickly that she needs to, get the fight down because she's going to be losing on volume and optics most likely. So I think Martin's live to get quite a few takedowns here and get a decent amount of control time. I also wouldn't be shocked to see a Martin sub, maybe not like a necessarily, a back take or anything, but like maybe like an arm triangle or something like that. So in the mid-range, I do like Martin. Maverick, I also kind of like at 8.5 just because I do think she has some potential knockout upside here. C talked about it on our podcast last night that, Jillian just doesn't really react well to shots on the feet, and I just really haven't seen any improvements in terms of her striking. I still don't think Maverick is, this animal on the feet, but if you kind of watched, her trajectory, she has made some pretty clear improvements in terms of her stand-up. And I think she's going to be probably pretty aggressive in going forward here. And I also think she might, go to the takedown too, because she's pretty confident in her jiu-jitsu, which that might, also get hairy depending on how you fall on the fight. But yeah, I think the two chicks could be decent spots in the mid-range.
Jonah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I actually agree with Luke that I think the women fighters in the 8K range are pretty interesting. Less so Martin for me. I would prefer to take Viana. We'll get to that when we get to the 7K range here. But I think Maverick has some upside. Like if that fight stays standing for a decent amount of time, I think that she is pretty live for a knockout. I know you guys just said you touched on the podcast last night. You touched on that. I think that Jillian she gets hit a lot. She doesn't look good when she gets hit. And yeah, Maverick's first UFC finish was like somewhat fluky because it came by cut stoppage. But like she was putting in work. She was landing heavy shots. If Jillian stands with her for 5 minutes like that, I would not be surprised whatsoever to see Maverick get that finish. I think Macy Barber is 7.9, but I kind of include her with the 8Ks just because it's like a mid-range fight against Grasso. I think Barber's similar here, where like the fight is somewhat closely lined, but she has the finishing upside over Grasso, and I think she could do a little bit control work in the clinch against the fence, but really just has like those finishing, the finishing upside that we need on DK. So I don't know; those are probably somewhat popular options in the mid range. I think that Philip Rowe, Gabe Green, I have like no read on who wins that fight, but it is minus 165 to end inside the distance, and like both guys are 8.2 and 8K respectively. So I think that we've seen Green put up volume before, and he could put up volume at 8K, and a volume-based decision at 8K doesn't kill you. And then Rowe, all of his wins have come by finish. So like he has a ton of finishing upside for a guy in the mid-range. We saw it. O'Day Osborne last week had an early finish at 7.8K. Different situation, but you get an early finish from a guy at 8K, it can win you a slate. So I think I'm eating some chalk in the mid-range just because I don't really like the other options, and I'm going to get a little different towards the bottom at 70K. But yeah, that's the mid-range for me.
Yeah, I actually have a bit of a contrarian play here. I'm not going to be, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying go super heavy, but I actually think Bobby Green's kind of a bit of a sneaky play here. Look, you're going to be looking, to put lineups together in the 8K range, you're struggling a bit as we talked about. But if you actually go and look at, obviously not his last fight with Thiago Moises, but his last two fights before that with Patrick and Venata, he went 111 against Venata and 98 against Patrick. And I actually think this fight, to some extent, is pretty similar to the Patrick fight. Green, if he so chooses, can probably take Jim Miller down whenever he wants. Miller's got a 46% career takedown defense. Green's a good wrestler, and we've seen Miller just get stuck on bottom against good grapplers in the past. I don't think Miller has the capability of someone like Moises in his last fight to kind of just work out of those bad positions. He's going to look for arm bars, and if that doesn't work, he's probably going to get passed and put in a dominant position by Green. So, I actually think Green could put up a lot of points in a decision against Miller if he takes that game plan. And on the other side of the coin, I kind of think Green's live to finish Miller on the feet here. Miller's been taking a lot of damage lately. He's old. The real question is really, as usual with Bobby Green, is he going to feel like posing in the octagon, or is he going to actually go for a finish? But I do think, given the cardio dynamic here, that a finish late is live. And I think, Green hitting 2 to 3 takedowns, going over 100 strikes and getting a finish is in play. So I'd expect him to be pretty low owned, just given, he's averaged 63 points for his career. So I think that's an interesting place to pivot there. I get the angle on Martin, Luke. For me, she's just not my favorite because I just feel like it's kind of a fight that could get pretty messy scramble-wise. Other place in this range that I really do like, you kind of touched on, John, is Gabe Green. I kind of like that spot a lot. Not so much from a betting angle, but I kind of think if Green wins, it's going to be fairly reliant on going forward, getting in Rowe's face, and throwing a ton of volume. I don't think Rowe's very good. It's possible Green gets stuck on the end of his reach, but I do think if he gets inside, he can hurt Rowe pretty frequently. I don't think Rowe's defensively responsible at all. So I think he's an interesting spot to go here. And then, obviously Maverick, if she's going to win this fight, it's likely going to be dominant. I kind of think that fight in general, if you're targeting, it's going to seem pretty binary. I think whoever wins that fight is going to look hindsight fairly obvious, either Maverick going forward and either grappling or just destroying her on the feet, or Jillian winning dominantly via grappling. But yeah, so my favorite spot in that range is probably Maverick, to be honest. And then, I'll have a little bit of Bobby Green and probably a decent amount of Gabe Green, to be honest. So we move down 7K range. I like this range a lot, to be honest. I shouldn't say I like it a lot. I don't like any range a lot. Obviously I like the scoring potential in the top range quite a bit, but I think there's a lot of playable dogs here who can pay their prices off. In particular, kind of starts for me with, Polyana Viana. I bet her in this fight. I think she's very live. Maybe she gets wiped out on the ground by Martin, but I think there's a decent chance she can out-scramble Martin, potentially submit her. And I also think, if, let's say, she puts Martin in danger early and it goes to the feet, I actually think she can hurt Martin standing. Easy to forget, but Polyana Viana actually knocked out Amanda Ribas regionally. And, don't get me wrong, I don't think Viana's an elite striker by any means, but I think Martin's that bad of a striker where there's a decent chance if it's standing for any length of time, Viana can get off consistently there. Other spots in that range that I really like, obviously Macy Barber. Jonah, you touched on that. Finishing upside is enormous. Volume upside is enormous. Possible she could get grappling going. And then, something else, another play here that I think is kind of sneaky is Andre Ewell. I haven't bet him. I probably won't. But I do think if Yule wins, he's likely to pay his price off, or at least get close to it. And I think KO could be in play. Gutierrez is very hittable in the pocket. And while Yule is basically a case study for regional KOs not materializing or not having much predictive value when it comes to UFC, he did get 13 KOs, I think, regionally. And so if he is getting off, I actually think he's got the potential to hurt Gutierrez here, maybe get a knockdown or two and finish him. And, I guess those are my thoughts on it. I would say you obviously should be playing Gilbert Burns in some lineups if you're mass entering, just because if he wins, he's obviously going to pay his price off. But generally, I'm obviously not very high on him in that spot. Jonah, what's your take on this range?
I don't know about Gilbert Burns. If I make 150 teams, I'm considering the all-in on Kamaru Usman 100% over 150. I'm not even kidding. I actually might do it. I haven't done it since I think Blades versus Volkov was the last time I went 100% on a main event. But this might be one of those spots for me. Other things, Viana, I think, is probably my favorite option. John, you touched on it. I bet her scorecards no action because I do think that Martin grinding out a decision that Luke kind of touched on is very possible and probably most likely. But we know Viana's going to play BJJ off her back. And when we're betting someone, I hate to see that because I'm just get up, but for DFS at 7.5K, or 7.6, she gets the finish. You're sitting really pretty at 7.6K. So I think she's one of the safer options just in terms of how her money line translates to DK price. Cause at 7.6K, she's clearly underpriced compared to the Vegas line, which has kind of moved somewhat close to a pick'em. And then at the bottom, I guess on this slate, I'm just kind of trying to capitalize on win conditions and upsides for guys I don't think are going to win because I don't like many underdogs in the betting market. But guys like Brian Kelleher, a lot of his win condition comes from pulling a guillotine on a takedown. Do I think he gets it against Ricky Simone? Probably not. But has Simone hittable as well and has gotten knocked out in the past by strikers who pack less of a punch than Brian Kelleher? Also, yes. So he could finish. Jim Miller. John, I thought your point about Bobby Green was interesting because Green to me is what Michael Johnson was last week, where I kind of thought he had more of a chance to finish than the betting market did. But you also don't want to get too overweight because he can be a flake at times. And he is highly priced, right? It's not like we get a massive discount for a guy who's not a finisher. So I think that's tough. But honestly, Jim Miller, a lot of his win equity comes via that first round submission. It's probably I don't know. I think my podcast co-host had bet it 13-1 for submission one for Miller, but almost all of his wins come inside the first round at this point in his career. So at 7.3K, I think you could do a lot worse. He probably doesn't win, but if he does, and then you get the top range going as well, that's how you build optimal lineups and get different and kind of finish towards the top in GPPs.
Luke, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, kind of similar sentiments as well. Even though me probably having, a little bit more of an overweight stance on Martin, I'm obviously still going to have some Viana as well for a lot of the reasons you guys mentioned. Once again, it's just tough because when we're analyzing and breaking down these fights, we're trying to also assess these win conditions. So when, we do all the research and we figure out, I don't really think this happens, but as to the point of the DFS game, it's just a different game. So you kind of have to take your stabs. And as Jonah talked about, assessing those fighters, who have upside in those win conditions. So with that, I think Viana's viable. And then Kelleher as well. Once again, I actually bet Ricky by decision at -120. So obviously I don't think that's going to happen. But there will be opportunities, at least 4 submissions. So at 7.2, 7.1, I don't mind that. Jim Miller, I get it, but it's just going to be tough for me to have a decent amount of him. I am going to have a little bit of Burns. I also have a pretty big bet on Usman straight and a couple other props, parlays on the fight too. But I do think Burns will be, moderately at least dangerous early. That I think that's largely his win condition. I'm kind of more so in camp. I don't think Burns subs Usman. I think it's more so relying on a knockout, and he's shown a propensity to come forward early. So I'll have some Burns. In terms of the plays I really don't like down here is Maki Pitolo at 7.5, at least from a GPP standpoint, because one, I just think Marquez is super, super tough. And for me, if Maki actually is taking this fight more intelligently, I think it's actually going to give him his better chance to win. And by doing so, I think that will also limit his scoring upside. with that. So I actually might use Maki more so in cash, just banking on the fact that, hopefully he fights smarter, but I still don't think he scores particularly well. And then Heinisch, assuming Heinisch has some success here, I think it's going to be more of like a grinding type fight. So I guess that might give him some potential upside there. But historically, I mean, Gastelum, I think ultimately, I think Heinisch is going to have trouble getting inside on Gastelum because I think that straight left hand is going to be there. Just the striking levels between the two are pretty different. And, at least in terms of the UFC, Heinisch, I think, only lands his takedowns at like 18% and maybe a little over one over the course of 15 minutes. You kind of have to go back regionally to see, some more of his wrestling. But to me, it's another fight where it's just a kind of a levels type of fight. So I don't love Heinisch at 7.4. I don't think he's knocking out Gastelum. I don't think he's subbing him. So for him to have any sort of upside, I think it would have to be like a ton of cage control, and then maybe work in a couple takedowns as well. But in general, yeah, I don't like either of those two. And then me being more so on the Maverick side of playing her a little heavier, I'm going to be more or less so on Jillian. But once again, if I'm wrong, at 7.7K, Jillian could look really solid. But I guess, yeah, my main two I'd probably want to hit on would be Kelleher and then potentially Ewell as well. Because I think you made some good points, John, too, in terms of the upside. I think personally that Gutierrez is going to kick his leg into oblivion. But if Andre Ewell does come forward, keeps hands in his face, it could be a high volume based decision, if not even potentially a later knockout. You brought up a lot of good points in that too, John. So yeah, I guess those are my two main ones that I'll probably look to have a decent amount of.
Yeah. So before we move on to like construction strategies, like Jonas, like I don't disagree necessarily with your point about Miller and Miller's, first round upside being his win condition. What I would say though is, and I'm kind of curious on like both of your perspectives on this, like my personal view of that fight, and maybe it varies for other people. I actually don't think. I think that win condition for Miller is like 6 to 10%. Like I honestly don't think the chance of him actually getting a first round sub is very high at all compared to what we've seen with normal fights. Like I just think Green, unlike most of the other guys Miller's been fighting, Green's actually an excellent grappler, and I just don't really see that upside being there. Like it could happen, but I'm not sure. Say Miller early sub is any more likely than Kelleher or Viana, for instance, getting a first round sub, or hell, even Gilbert Burns, to be honest. And so I guess I would throw it back to you. Like, do you think you're going to be evenly distributed along there, or is there a reason that you would kind of like stake out a Miller more than the other three?
I just said Miller because I think it would be a little different in terms of like the tier of guys I'll have. Like Viana will definitely be the highest owned underdog for me, just because I think she might have the best chance to win. Obviously, Ewell and Robertson are in pick'em type situations on this card, but I honestly think Viana has more finishing upside probably than Ewell. And I don't know, Robertson, you mentioned it's like a binary fight. The winner probably looks like a big favorite in hindsight. I played the under in Jillian versus Maverick, which is kind of a thing, like Jillian unders for a long time. She hasn't cashed in 2 consecutive, so I feel like people are kind of cooling on it. But like we haven't seen that much Maverick off her back. And I think that if Jillian gets on top, she'll be very aggressive going for a finish. So I think that it's probably Viana for me. I have some interest in Robertson. I probably won't have a lot of Ewell at all, just because with the new DK scoring, significant strikes are scored so much less. Like obviously it's just 0.5 to 0.4, but over the course of a fight, that adds up. Like Ewell's ceiling, I'm just looking to his game log, is 81 in his last fight against Rivera, which is 123 significant strikes. Like, I don't know. I think that's probably more than he lands here. And it's still a pick'em fight or whatever, small underdog. So for me, it's probably Viana as the most owned underdog, and then probably Brian Kelleher as a combination of the flyer on the finishing upside, and I think he could actually win the fight. And look, if you like Gilbert Burns, he's obviously a strong play in this range. I just feel very strongly.
I don't like Gilbert Burns.
Yeah, I feel very strongly that Kamaru Usman is the side in our main event, but I could be wrong. So, yeah.
So I want to real quick, let's each pick out, obviously we don't need to touch on the main event here. I think anybody who's played DFS for any length of time knows they probably should be near full exposure to the main event. Although if you think not, say why. But just 1 or 2 matchups each that, you're going to be targeting both sides of heavily. Luke, I'll start with you.
Probably the number one for me is going to be Philip Rowe and Gabe Green, just because I don't have a particularly great read on the fight. I'm more so actually on the Rowe side. But it's another fight. I don't want to necessarily say it's binary, but I think it's really kind of who's able to get off on their game is really going to have success. Yeah, obviously Green's had a pretty sizable disadvantage in terms of reach here. So, I mean, for him to have, extended success, he has to get inside here. And in doing so, I think he's going to take some shots. Obviously, Rowe has shown some knockout upside. He's a BJJ brown belt as well. Pretty long legs, even if Green decides to take him down. I think we'll see him probably throw up some triangles, be pretty aggressive off of his back. It's just another fight where I actually see both guys having a decent amount of finishing upside. I know Green took like a ridiculous amount of shots against D-Rod. But honestly, I guess a little side note on D-Rod, to be honest, I don't think he's actually the biggest hitter in the world. And he's also a guy who's like more hook reliant, also going backwards too. Whereas I think Rowe, it's those big, long, fast, explosive, straight shots. So that's probably the main one that I'm going to have a lot of exposure to on both. And then second being Martin and Viana. Like I said, I'll probably have a little bit more Martin, but I still will give, Polyana the credit there that, that WMMA guard sub is always there. So
Jonah, how about you?
Yeah, so I think that one of them for sure is Rowe versus Green in the mid range, because I mentioned I don't have a great read on who wins the fight, so I might be just like super safe here and kind of split my exposure. Oftentimes, I think that the 8K versus 8.2K range is like the best price range to take a stance in DFS, because the ownership is so often split, because obviously the line is close. But for me, I don't really have that strong of a read, so I'll have a decent amount of exposure to both. And then I'll go with a different women's fight. I'll go Maverick versus Robertson as another fight that I'll have decent exposure to, because I do think that they stand at range. Maverick, it could look even money to knock her out. And like, that is not something that her price or the line in Vegas kind of indicates here. And then I think Robertson, if she gets on top, is always live for submission. And like Luke said, like the sub from guard and WMMA is always live. Like if Jillian gets taken down or out muscled, like at least she'll be throwing up shit from her back, and like hopefully it leads to a finish from one side. So two fights that I'm targeting both sides on would be Maverick Robertson, and then in the mid range, Rowe versus Green.
Yeah. So Maverick Robertson after the main event's probably my favorite fight on the slate to target, to be honest. Don't have much to add, but yeah, like I said earlier, I think it's pretty binary. I think a Maverick win is either an early KO or just 15 minutes of utter domination, in which case I think she's probably going to score well anyway. And kind of the same thing for Robertson. Like if she can get on top of Maverick consistently, she's going to put up points like she has every single time she's been able to win fights. I mean, her wins are 94, 92, 110, 106, 97, 98. All of those likely good enough to pay off her price here. So yeah, that's going to probably be my heaviest target. Other than that, like I said, I'm not really as bullish on Rowe Green. Like I kind of have this suspicion if Green can't get inside that we may see not necessarily a staring contest, but like a lot of resetting by Green, like Rowe tagging him and him resetting, and it could turn into just a much more low volume affair than we think. Like I know him and D-Rod, got after it, but D-Rod's also willing to bring the volume like to an insane degree. And so that made a bit more sense. I think it could happen here. I don't know. I can't shake the feeling that Green's going to try to pressure, but if you can't do it effectively, this could devolve into like a pretty weird fight. Other than that, I won't have massive exposure to it, but I do think Simon Kelleher is interesting. Kelleher's win condition is probably a finish, and I have a suspicion. Look, the sub could happen. I have a suspicion that Simon's going to work him, though, and just basically do whatever he wants in the grappling here. If he doesn't get subbed, I think, 7-8 takedown upsides in play and a big score. I obviously won't be heavier on him than either Usman or Vieira, but, I will have exposure to him, and I'll be pretty heavily exposed to Kelleher. So other than that, like, let's just touch real quick on construction strategy. Like, Jonah, how big or small do you think your core is going to be this week? Pretty well balanced, or do you think it's going to be tighter than normal?
I think it might be tighter than normal because of the fact that, like, when you ask that question about what fights exactly I'm focusing on, It's a harder question to answer than normal because oftentimes there are these fights, like even Prochnio the other week against Roundtree, that was like minus 400 to end inside the distance. I was giving Prochnio a shot, and I had ownership on both guys. There's another fight last week that's slipping my mind where I thought the dog had a decent shot in a fight that was like minus 300 to end inside the distance, and you could get underweight or overweight rather on a guy who's low price and all of his win condition comes from a finish. So this week I feel more strongly, like, first of all, in terms of betting, this is the most units I've had on a card in my entire life. Like I have, well, it's partially because there is a dumb prop on Fox Bet where you could bet under Burns takedowns, 1.5 takedowns for Burns minus 175. So like I got it in pretty good there. They were taking like, I don't know, I think they were taking to win $1,000. So I got it in decent there. I have a max bet on Burns. So I actually feel more strongly inside this week. What'd you say?
You mean Usman?
Yeah, I did say Burns. Yeah, I definitely didn't mean Burns. I definitely mean Usman. Although it'd be funny if like I bet Burns and then his takedown under, because then I would just lose it all if he won a decision wrestling based. But that won't happen. But basically, I just feel strongly about sides as opposed to fights. Like there are always those fights you could look at and be like, well, I think a finish happens here, but I'm not sure who wins. And there's a little bit of that in Green versus Rowe. But for me, it's more so like, I think Kamaru Usman wins and dominates. I think Vieira wins and dominates. I feel strongly that Barber is a way better play than Grasso is on DK. I feel strongly that Viana is a better play than Martin is on DK. So I'll probably have a tighter core than normal this week. Whether that means I don't play 150 teams or I play 3 max instead of 5 max, I'm not sure yet. But I do expect my core to be fairly tight for a 12-game slate at least.
Luke, how about you?
Yeah, so I guess I haven't really decided, I guess, how I'm gonna get after it. Still waiting for some more exposure stuff to come out, but I think I'm probably going to actually be a little bit more balanced this week, just because honestly, my take on a lot of these fights is just not very strong. And so, I mean, obviously outside of, really kind of that top 5 range. So I think I'm probably going to spread it around a little bit because, yeah, like I said, I mean, I just see merit to quite a few different points. I think it's definitely, we were kind of talking about it before, John, where, it might even be smart to, throw 3 or 4 7Ks in multiple constructions, because I think that could be potentially solid for this card. And then you obviously have the cash to go spend up top at 9K. But yeah, I'm probably going to be pretty sprinkled out just because it's just one of these cards where there's just a whole lot of if then that, if so, then that for me. And so, yeah, there just isn't a ton of fights that I have an uber strong opinion on, but definitely, as we touched on throughout this, there are some dogs I think who have a decent amount of upside, assuming those win conditions are met. I'm just not necessarily so sold on which ones those are or have a strong opinion on those. So I'm probably gonna spread it out a little bit.
Yeah, I'm kind of in between the two of you in that there's a couple sides here that I am very, very, very passionate about. Like I'm going to be very heavy on Usman. I'm going to be very heavy on Vieira. I'm going to be very heavy on Barber. I'll probably be very heavy on Viana. But other than that, like those 4 really, I expect it's going to be fairly spread out for me. Like I said, I'll have a lot of exposure to Maverick Robertson. And then I'll be taking a bunch of dart throws in the low range, and I'll probably have a bit of Bobby Green. So it's like there's those 4 spots where I expect to have a ton of exposure, and then I'll probably add, I don't know, maybe an extra 10 to 12 people in there. I don't know. It's like I don't feel very passionately outside of those 4 at all. Yeah, so that's where we are. So let's close it up. Each of us give, Jonah, I'll start with you, 2 people in each, your 2 favorite in each range going into, Saturday.
So like 9K, 8K, 7K.
Yep.
So we'll go Vieira, Usman. I think that's kind of chalky at the top. We'll go Maverick, and then I don't know, it might be a cop out to say one of Rowe or Green. I'll go Macy Barber at 7.9. I'll cheat the system and go no 8K. So I'll go Vieira, Usman at the top, Maverick and Barber in the mid range. And then at the bottom, it'll be Viana and probably Kelleher for me as the top 6 kind of tight core for me.
How about you, Luke?
Yeah, so I'm gonna have to be a parrot here and say, a Vieira Usman at the top. But like I said, I am gonna take a little bit more of a stance on Bilal here, just for the sake of being a little different at the top. In the middle, like I said, I'm gonna probably be a little over on Martin. And then I like Maverick at 8.5. Real quick, I want to get Jonah's take on Grasso Barber. I know obviously you said from a DK perspective that Barber's the better play here, and I 100% agree. But I do think even more so, me being on the side of Grasso actually just winning a decision here, she actually has scored pretty well in high volume striking based decisions in her couple last W's. So, I mean, obviously, once again, we're talking about prices and numbers, which is the value side. I concede with Barber, but do you think there's any merit to Grasso here and just being more of a contrarian take? Because I feel like she's going to be pretty low owned.
I definitely think Grasso will be low owned, like one of the most low owned fighters of the slate. Like nobody wants to play Hernandez and Lima at the bottom, so I think they'll be the two least owned. But Grasso is definitely someone you can get overweight on easily without getting super exposed. I think the new scoring system hurts her, but I'm also like, I have trouble thinking of Grasso. Like in these recent fights, she's been like minus 300 in her last fight, which was a similar spot. And in my brain, I'm like, well, yeah, she's just going to win a striking based decision and whatever, 80, 85 is her ceiling. And that isn't great at 9K, but maybe I need to reassess things. And like 8K, she's a decent play. I just prefer Barber in that price range. And so I think Grasso's all right, but I don't think I'll get much over the field. Although, like I mentioned, it's not hard to. Like, she might only be 10, 15%. You toss her in 20, 25, you're almost double the field.
Yeah. Cool. And then I guess for my dogs real quick, or the 7K, I should say, I guess I don't, like I said, I don't really love two per se. I'm just going to have pretty even distribution here between, primarily probably Kelleher, Viana, Robertson, and Ewell. I am actually going to take a couple punts on Hernandez just because I do have, a sneaking suspicion that, Vieira is going to get clipped at space one of these days. So granted, definitely not going to be, quote unquote overweight on it, but I'm just going to have a few little interesting shares there.
Yeah. So for me, not going contrarian in the top range. I think Usman and Vieira are pretty clearly the two best plays up there. I dare you to give me a reason why they're not. 8K range, it's got to be Maverick and Gabe Green for me, I think. Like I said, I'll have some Bobby Green, but I do think Gabe Green's got some finishing upside there, and obviously he's got some volume upside. And, yeah, not to beat a dead horse, but I think a Maverick win is predicated on domination. And then the low range, it's Viana and Barber for me. I'm going to be super heavy onto both of them. And so, yeah, I mean, that's it for me. Guys, you want to touch on the comment we just got in there? How many teams lineups are you going to be creating, and what are you going to be playing in? Jonah, you want to start?
Yeah, I'll go first. So most weeks on DK, first of all, I haven't entered any contest yet or really built teams. I kind of save my building process till Friday night, Saturday morning, partially because I'm still analyzing stuff throughout the week and partially because sometimes we wake up and there's like 9 fights on Saturday morning and things change a lot. But normally I'll play like 150 teams. I'll max enter a smaller tournament. Usually they have like a $1. I'll like max that. I won't spend too much time. And then I'll play a 3 max team and probably all the 3 max stuff up to like $150. So I'll throw 3 teams in all of those. And then I'll play 5 max in some of the bigger contests, like the $55, and maybe they have an $85 sometimes. And then I'll run 20 max in the $3, one of the best tournaments, the Haymaker that DK runs. I usually run 20 in there and then 20 in the big GPP. The big GPP is like a ton of rake and is super top heavy in terms of like your EV playing it is probably low. But I'll throw like 10, 15 teams in the $20, whatever it is. And then I'll run a single entry team, depending how confident I am, like, I don't know, at least out through the $100, $200 range. So most weeks I'll have a batch of 150 teams and then a single entry and then a couple teams in the middle with like, 3 or 5 max kind of fields.
Yeah, Luke, how about you?
Yeah, so I usually max the mini max, the dollar tournament every single week. I was pissed last week. I got second in it. I missed by like four points. So that sucked. There's been a couple of those, but yeah, so I usually do that one every week. I used to also max the $3 Haymaker. And then, yeah, usually for like the primary big contest, I'll usually throw like 5 in there, and then I might sprinkle some stuff in cash. I've largely just played tournaments mainly. I've tried to get more heavily involved in cash, but it's honestly on a card like this, I don't think I'm going to play a ton of cash personally, just because I just don't feel like my reads are as strong. But I don't know. We'll see. I guess that's primarily what I do on a weekly basis.
Yeah, I'm going to max the mini max, and then I like to play a lot of single entries, to be honest. I just kind of think, I mean, whether it gives you more flexibility, I don't know, but it's a smaller field, and it's like I don't necessarily need to have 6 people go optimum. I can have 6 good scores as long as they're not straight chalk and compete for them. And so I'll usually put a line opportunity to the 150. I'll do the $100 single entry. And then, yeah, like Johnny, you touched on the big one. Like I'll put 10 to 20 in there, really more because I'm a degenerate than anything else, than me expecting expecting to win. And then, yeah, like those little 20 entry maxes are kind of nice. Maybe I'll throw 15 to the $5. But yeah, so that's it this week, guys. Jonah, thanks for coming out. It was a pleasure to have you on. As usual, I'm your host, John Stigger, MMA. You can find me on Twitter, MMA Fox. You can find Jonah on Twitter at JSchiffy, DFS. Great follow, really sharp guy, part of Team Stats, so give him a follow. As usual, we got Luke at SWR_betting. We'll be back next Thursday, guys. Thanks a lot. Take it easy.